Sign the divorce papers and leave my son alone. I have had enough of your family madness. Now let me live for myself.
They didn't even let her say goodbye to the dog. That was the thing that broke Zoe Park. Not the divorce papers, not the cruel words, not the years of silent dinners and cold shoulders and monthly heartbreak dressed up as medical disappointment. It was the golden retriever, named Butter, wagging his tail at the top of the staircase while the security guard blocked her path back inside, telling her she had 5 minutes and a single bag, and that the dog legally belonged to the Lee family estate. Butter whimpered once. Zoe pressed her fingers to her lips, then pressed them against the iron gate as it closed in her face, and she told herself she would not cry. She had promised herself in that bedroom, staring at the signature on those papers, that she would not give this family one more tear. Not one. She had given them 5 years. She had given them her youth, her career, her country, her name. She had swallowed every cruel remark, smiled through every humiliating family dinner, endured every doctor's office, every failed treatment, every pitying glance from women who had never once welcomed her into their circle. She had given them everything. And now, they were keeping the dog. Zoe walked into the Seoul rain with her single bag and her broken spine held straight as a blade. The street outside the Lee family compound in Gangnam glistened under the cold October downpour. Zoe didn't open the umbrella she'd stuffed into her bag. There was something cathartic about being soaked to the bone, something honest. The rain didn't pretend. It didn't smile at her in public and whisper that she was a disappointment in private. It just fell, cold and relentless. And at least that was real. She had nowhere to go. Her apartment before marriage had been sublet years ago. Her friends in Seoul had slowly drifted away, not because they were cruel, but because Tae-young's family had made it quietly, socially impossible to maintain those friendships. Her visa was tied to the marriage. Without it, she had 30 days. 30 days to dismantle 5 years of a life that had never truly been hers to begin with. Her phone buzzed. Tae-young's mother. She didn't answer. It buzzed again. The family lawyer? She kept walking. Seoul moved around her like a machine that had no use for broken things. The luxury stores of Gangnam blazed with warm light. Women in expensive coats laughed under designer umbrellas. Taxis sprayed water at her ankles. Nobody noticed the woman walking alone in the rain with her whole life in a bag that barely weighed anything. Nobody saw her at all. And maybe that was the cruelest part. Not the rejection, but the invisibility. She walked for almost 2 hours before her legs gave out. She found a bench near the Itaewon subway station and sat down hard, rain soaking through her coat, through her clothes, through to the skin. This was the foreigner district, the one part of Seoul where her Nigerian-British face didn't pull second glances, where people were too busy living their own complicated lives to notice hers unraveling on a public bench. Zoe pulled out her phone. 27 missed calls. None of them from Tae-young. She laughed at that. A short, hollow sound that startled a pigeon off the pavement. 5 years. 5 years of trying to be enough, and he couldn't even pick up the phone to check if she'd found shelter. His mother had been precise in her cruelty. You will leave this house with what you came with. Which is nothing. Because you are nothing. You are a foreign woman who could not do the one thing a wife exists to do. And Tae-young had stood in the corner of the room with his hands in his pockets and said, with a gentleness that was somehow worse than rage, "She's right, Zoe. I'm sorry. But I need an heir, like this was a dynasty, like she was a failed transaction." She closed her eyes. The rain fell. And then a car pulled up. It wasn't just any car. It was a black Mercedes S-Class with windows, so deeply tinted they might as well have been walls. The kind of car that didn't belong in Itaewon. The kind of car that made the air around it feel different, charged, dangerous, like lightning before a storm. The engine cut to silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the back door opened. Zoe? Her name? In a voice she had never heard before. Low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had never once in its life needed to raise itself to be obeyed. She looked up. The man leaning from the back seat was Korean, maybe early 30s, dressed in a black suit that looked like it had been designed specifically for the angles of his body. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. Not because they were cold, but because they were calculating, measuring, the eyes of someone who looked at the world and saw only variables. He was, objectively, the most dangerous-looking person Zoe had ever seen. And he was looking at her like she was the most interesting thing he'd encountered in years. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "Get in the car." "I don't know you." "No." He didn't move. "But I know you. I know your name, your marriage, your visa status, your prenuptial agreement, and I know that in approximately 30 days, immigration will escort you out of this country if you don't find a solution. I know everything about you, Zoe." A pause. "I'm offering you one." She should have run. Every rational part of her brain was screaming. But the rational part of her brain had also told her to trust Tae-yang, to believe the promises, to stay 5 years too long. So maybe rational was overrated. She stood up, walked to the car, got in. The door closed behind her with a sound like fate locking into place. "My name is Kang Min-jun," he said as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. "I own approximately 60% of Seoul's entertainment district, 4 hotels, 2 shipping companies, and a significant number of debts that the Lee family owes me and refuses to repay." He said all of this the way someone else might discuss the weather. Calm, factual, unbothered. "Your ex-husband's father borrowed from me. 3 billion won? He's been avoiding repayment for 2 years, using political connections and carefully maintained respectability." Zoe stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need your help." He turned to face her, fully for the first time, and up close, the effect was almost disorienting. Not just his looks, which were severe and architectural, but the intensity behind his eyes, the sense that he was thinking 17 things simultaneously, and had already reached conclusions she hadn't even considered yet. "I need a wife. Publicly. Someone whose presence beside me sends a specific message to the Lee family and to Seoul's social circle. Someone they will not be able to ignore." "You want me to pretend to be your wife?" "I want to give you a weapon," he said simply. "Your ex-husband threw you out because he believed you were the problem. I want to show Seoul, show all of them, that you are never the problem. That they made the biggest mistake of their lives." Zoe was quiet for a long moment. "And what do you get?" "A scandal. Something that forces the Lee family into a corner they can't legislate their way out of." His jaw shifted. Nothing embarrasses an old money family like their discarded daughter-in-law thriving on the arm of their greatest rival. The car slid through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul like a blade. "What are the terms?" she asked. He almost smiled. "Smart, good. Welcome to K-Mafia Romance Stories, besties. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. Because this story is going to take everything from you and give it back multiplied." The penthouse was on the 43rd floor of a tower in Gangnam that Zoe had walked past 100 times without ever imagining she'd stand inside it. Floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. A kitchen that was larger than the apartment she'd lived in before she married Tae-yang. The city glittered 43 floors below, like a kingdom she'd once wanted to belong to. "The master suite is yours," Min-jun said, setting her bag near the entrance without ceremony. "I maintain a separate apartment 1 floor down. In public, we are married. Deeply, visibly, undeniably married. In private, you have complete freedom. No expectations, no pressure, no performance when no one is watching." He turned to face her. "I'll arrange the visa paperwork tomorrow. You'll have a card for expenses. Clothes, appointments, whatever you need to prepare for appearances." Zoe looked around the space that was now somehow hers. "When would the wedding be?" "Tomorrow." She blinked. "That's I don't waste time when I've made a decision. His eyes held hers. And I've made this one. Just like that. Just like that. She should have felt overwhelmed. She did feel overwhelmed. But underneath the fear, underneath the disorientation, something else was flickering. Small and stubborn and furious. The first real warmth she'd felt in years. It felt like survival. It felt like refusing to disappear quietly, the way Taeyang's family had assumed she would. Okay, she said. Tomorrow. That night, standing in the massive mirror of the master suite, still wearing her rain-soaked clothes, Zoe's phone rang. Taeyang. Finally, she answered. Zoe. His voice was careful, practiced. My mother wanted me to check that you're all right. That you found somewhere to stay. She almost laughed. His mother. Of course. He couldn't even pretend the concern was his own. I'm fine, she said. Are you going back to London? Or to your family in Nigeria? I can arrange. I'm staying in Seoul. A pause. Zoe, I'm getting married, actually. She watched her own face in the mirror as she said it and was surprised by what she saw. Not grief. Not fear. Something else. Something that had been missing from her face for 5 years. Something that looked a great deal like herself. Tomorrow. To someone who actually knows my worth. The silence on the other end was exquisite. You can't be... Good night, Taeyang. She hung up, looked at herself in the mirror one long moment. Then she set down the phone, went to run a bath, and let herself breathe for what felt like the first time in years. The next morning arrived wrapped in gold light. Zoe woke to find a dress laid across the bed. Midnight blue, simple, breathtaking in the way that very expensive things always pretended to be simple. Shoes, a jewelry box, a note in precise, economical handwriting. Car leaves at noon, KMJ. She dressed slowly, carefully, with the particular attention of someone who is performing an act of reclamation. Each piece of jewelry, each careful stroke of makeup. She wasn't dressing for Min Jun. She wasn't dressing for the cameras or the gossip blogs or the social circles that had spent 5 years looking through her. She was dressing for the woman in the mirror who had spent 5 years shrinking and was done. When she stepped into the back of the waiting car at noon exactly, Min Jun was already there. He was devastating in a charcoal suit. His eyes moved over her slowly, and for one unguarded moment, something crossed his face. Something he quickly reassembled behind the usual calm. You look, he started, then stopped. Don't tell me I look like I belong beside you, Zoe said. The corner of his mouth moved. I was going to say, you look like trouble. She looked out the window. Good. The registry office was efficient and utterly unromantic. A clerk with reading glasses and the air of someone who had processed 15 marriages before lunch pronounced them legally bound in approximately 4 minutes. They signed documents. A witness, Min Jun's assistant, a slight young man who looked like he had witnessed stranger things and thought nothing of it, signed where indicated. And then it was done. Zoe stared at the platinum band on her finger. The diamond was obscene. It caught the fluorescent office light and threw it back like an argument. Outside on the steps, the Seoul afternoon was sharp and cold. Min Jun stood beside her, both of them looking out at the street. Congratulations, Mrs. Kang, he said. Congratulations, Mr. Kang. She glanced at the matching band on his hand. This is the strangest day of my life. Including the day you left your first marriage? She considered. Tied. He almost smiled again. She was starting to recognize the almost smiles. They were, she thought, the most honest thing about him. In 2 weeks, he said, there is a charity gala. Seoul's entire elite will be there, including the Lee family. Zoe's chin lifted. Tell me what to wear. The 2 weeks between the wedding and the gala were strange and suspended, like the held breath before a storm. Min Jun was rarely in the penthouse. When he was polite and distant and professional in a way that felt almost deliberate, like he was maintaining a careful border. He'd leave coffee outside her door in the morning without knocking. He'd have dinner delivered and leave a note asking if she needed anything. He kept his word. Her freedom, her space, no pressure. Zoe used the time aggressively. She bought clothes with the quiet, focused energy of someone rebuilding an armory. She got her hair done, her nails, reacquainted herself with the woman she'd been before 5 years of apologizing for existing had worn her down to someone barely recognizable. She went to galleries and sat in cafes and walked through Seoul's streets without once asking permission or checking the time or wondering if anyone at the Lee house would disapprove. She was reclaiming herself one ordinary afternoon at a time. But at night, she'd stand at the windows of the penthouse and watch the city and think about the man one floor below and wonder what it meant that he'd chosen her. Specifically her, a stranger on a rainy bench in Itaewon. With such certainty. A few days before the gala, Minjun knocked on her door. She opened it. He stood in the hallway in a casual black shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, looking somehow more dangerous than he did in a suit. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought we should practice," he said. "Practice what?" "Being married." He extended a cup. "In public, we need to be convincing. That requires a degree of," he searched for the word, "familiarity with each other." She took the coffee. "What does practicing being married look like to you?" "Sitting in the same room. Conversation." He gestured toward the living area. "Possibly learning enough about each other that we don't look like strangers when someone asks us how we met." She moved aside to let him in. They sat at opposite ends of the long sofa and talked. First carefully, formally, the biographical necessities. Zoe, 29, British Nigerian, had come to Seoul 6 years ago on a journalism fellowship and fallen in love with both the city and a man she had since radically reassessed. Min Jun, 32, Seoul-born, had built his empire from a starting point he described only as difficult and declined to elaborate on. But then the coffee grew cold and they kept talking. He told her about a specific restaurant in Mapo where the fish was the best in the city. She told him about the first article she'd ever published before the marriage had quietly absorbed her career. He admitted he hadn't read fiction since his 20s. She told him that was tragic. He asked her to recommend something. She got up and brought a book from her room and dropped it on the cushion beside him without ceremony. He picked it up and looked at it, then looked at her. "You're lending me a book." "I'm lending my husband a book," she corrected. "Practice." Something shifted in his face, subtly, like a light moving behind a window. The night of the gala arrived. Zoe stood in front of the mirror in a dress that she'd chosen herself. Emerald green, fitted, with a draped neckline and a back so low it felt like a declaration. It wasn't the dress of a woman who had been thrown away. It was the dress of a woman who had survived it. She heard the penthouse door, heard footsteps, then silence. She turned to find Min Jun standing in the bedroom doorway, completely still, one hand braced against the doorframe, looking at her with an expression that was so different from his usual controlled blankness that she almost didn't recognize it. His jaw was tight, his eyes were dark. "Say something," she told him. "I'm trying to." His voice was different, rougher. "You look..." He stopped, tried again. "They are going to lose their minds." "Good." He crossed the room slowly. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that she'd been low-key aware of since the first car ride and had been categorically refusing to think about. "May I?" He lifted one hand. She nodded. His fingers adjusted the clasp at her neckline, delicate and precise. Then his hand rested briefly at her jaw, just a moment, warm and still, before he stepped back. "Ready?" he asked. Zoe looked at herself one last time in the mirror, looked at the woman staring back, strong jaw, shoulders back, eyes that had stopped apologizing. "More than," she said. The ballroom of the Shilla Hotel was exactly what Zoe expected. the kind of money that had learned to perform restraint. Chandeliers, champagne and crystal. Women who spent more on their skin than Zoe had earned in her final year as a journalist. Men who owned things they'd never seen with their own eyes. Minjun's hand rested at the small of her back as they entered, and she felt the shift in the room immediately. Heads turning, whispers threading through the crowd like current through water. She heard her own name twice before they'd taken 10 steps. Who is she? She's stunning. Is that Kang Minjun's? She was married to Lee Tae-yang. Did you know? Impossible. Zoe smiled at no one in particular and kept walking. Then she saw them. The Lee family stood near the center of the room like they owned it, because in many ways they did. Tae-yang's mother in a white dress, holding court with the particular confidence of a woman who had never once doubted her right to take up space. His father, with a circle of business associates, his sisters hovering nearby, and Tae-yang himself, standing with a woman on his arm, young, Korean, beautiful in the careful, breakable way his mother had always preferred. Their eyes met across the room. Zoe watched his face go white. She watched him try to reconcile what he was seeing. Her, here, in this room, in this dress, with this man beside her, against the version of her he'd discarded on a rainy afternoon like an administrative inconvenience. She watched him fail. Minjun's lips brushed her ear. Breathe, smile, and let them choke on it. She smiled. It was radiant. It was devastating. It was the smile of a woman who had been planted in the dark and grown toward the light anyway. Tae-yang began moving through the crowd toward them. His mother followed. The whole family unit shifting, predatory, pulling together the way families do when they sense something threatening their narrative. Zoe. Tae-yang's voice, when he reached them, was strangled, like a man who'd rehearsed for a scenario and found the script entirely useless. What are you doing here? Attending a charity gala with my husband. Her voice was pleasant, conversational, like this was a perfectly ordinary encounter. She gestured toward Min-jun with the easy ownership of a woman who had forgotten how to be uncertain. You remember Kang Min-jun, don't you? I believe your father owes him a very significant amount of money. Tae-yang's mother had gone white. This is impossible. I got married 2 weeks ago, Zoe said sweetly, just after the divorce finalized, which was wonderfully efficient. Thank you for that. Min-jun extended his hand toward Tae-yang. It was the most precisely calibrated social maneuver Zoe had ever witnessed. Formal enough to be irrefusable, weighted enough to be humiliating. I owe you a debt of gratitude, actually, Min-jun said. If you hadn't been foolish enough to let her go, I'd never have had the remarkable good fortune of making her my wife. Tae-yang's jaw tightened. His eyes moved from Min-jun to Zoe, and what she saw in them surprised her. Not cruelty, not the cold dismissal she'd gotten in the bedroom of his family home. Something worse. Something that looked like grief that had arrived too late to be useful. You married him, Tae-yang said quietly. Zoe, you don't know what he... I know exactly what he is, Zoe said. He is someone who saw my worth on day one. That's enough. She felt Min-jun's hand settle at her waist, steady and warm and unmistakable. They walked away. The balcony was cool and quiet, suspended above the glittering chaos of the city below. Min-jun poured them both champagne. Zoe took a long sip and exhaled. You were extraordinary in there, he said. I wanted to be sick, she admitted. Yes, you were extraordinary anyway. He leaned against the railing, looking out at Seoul. That's the difference. She watched his profile. The clean, severe lines of it. The way he seemed, always, to be thinking about more than he said. You look sad, she said. I don't get sad. You look sad, she repeated. He was quiet for a moment. Then, revenge is smaller than you imagine it will be. I've learned that the hard way. It fills approximately 5 minutes. And then you're still the same person, with the same wounds, just... The other person is bleeding now too. Is that why you warned me? That's why I tried to warn you. He turned to look at her. Did it feel like I promised? Like justice? She considered honestly. It felt like the first time I've breathed in 5 years. Something moved through his face. Quick and unguarded and then gone, but she saw it. Then maybe, he said quietly. It was worth it. The city hummed below them. The cold night air pressed in around them, and neither of them moved to go back inside. Can I ask you something? Zoe said. You can ask. Why me? Of all the women in Seoul you could have proposed this arrangement to. Why a stranger on a bench in Itaewon in the rain? He looked at her for a long moment. I had you investigated when I found out about the divorce. Your background, your history, the prenuptial terms. A pause. I expected to find what I found, a woman who'd been broken down. What I didn't expect... He stopped. What? I had someone watching the Lee compound that day. Watching for anything I could use against them. His voice was careful. You walked out of those gates, and you walked for 2 hours in the rain. No calls to anyone, no crying, no falling apart. You just kept walking. Like you decided that if the only direction available was forward, then forward was where you were going. Zoe looked down at her glass. That kind of person, he said, is rare. That kind of person I wanted on my side. She looked up, found him watching her with that same calculating intensity, but underneath it, something else, something newer, something that hadn't been there in the car. Minjun, she said, don't. His voice was soft. I wasn't going to say anything alarming. You were going to say something real, he said, and I'm not sure I know what to do with real things yet. She laughed, short and surprised and genuine. That might be the most honest thing you've said to me. Don't spread it around. I have a reputation. Later that night, the car ride back to the penthouse was silent in a way that was entirely different from their first car ride. That silence had been the silence of two strangers with a transaction between them. This silence was something else, warm and charged and full of things neither of them had said on the balcony. When the elevator doors opened at the penthouse floor, neither of them moved immediately. The city glowed 43 floors below through the glass walls of the lift. Zoe was aware of the exact distance between them, the precise, charged inches of it, with every nerve in her body. Thank you, she said, for tonight. You didn't need me, he said quietly. You walked into that room and did it yourself. I needed... She stopped, tried again. I needed someone to believe I was worth showing up for, before I could. He looked at her, then, slowly, like a man making a decision he couldn't undo, he raised his hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered at her jaw, barely touching, just enough. You were always worth it, he said. They were just blind. She didn't move away. Neither did he. When he kissed her, it was soft at first, questioning, almost uncertain, which was so entirely unlike everything she'd come to expect from him that it unlocked something in her chest she hadn't known was locked. She kissed him back. His hand came to her face, careful and reverent. She felt the controlled, deliberate tension of a man who had been holding himself in careful reserve, finally choosing not to. They pulled back at the same time, both breathing unsteadily, staring at each other in the light of the city. That wasn't in the arrangement, Zoe said. No. Are you going to pretend it didn't happen? He looked at her with those dark, complicated eyes. I'm not sure I'm capable of pretending right now, he admitted, which is new. 3 days later, Seoul woke up to headlines. Someone at the gala had photographed them on the balcony and sold the image to 3 different outlets, simultaneously. By 6 a.m., Zoe's face was everywhere. Kang Min-jun's new wife, Lee family's discarded ex. The stories ranged from sympathetic to scathing. Gold digger, opportunist, mastermind, scorned woman, foreign temptress, Seoul's most talked about couple. Every narrative simultaneously. Min-jun stood in the living room watching the news with his jaw set and his phone already to his ear, speaking rapid Korean she could only partially follow. The words lawyer and source and something that sounded like consequences recurring. Zoe stood in the doorway and read the headlines. Then she started laughing. He turned to look at her. "You're laughing, Min-jun." She walked to him. "This is exactly what we wanted. Every person in Seoul now knows I didn't disappear. They know I didn't crumble. They know I landed on my feet so loud that it made the news." She gestured at the screen. "Let them call me a gold digger. Let them write whatever they want. The story they're telling is that I survived, that I won. That's the only part that matters." He stared at her, something complicated moving through his face. "You're extraordinary," he said, almost to himself. "I'm angry," she corrected. "And I've decided to be loud about it instead of small." His hand reached out, caught hers. His fingers closed around it. Not the practiced, possessive hold of a man performing a role for cameras. Something different, something private. "Then be loud," he said. "I'll stand next to you." Over the next week, they became Seoul's unavoidable spectacle. Every appearance was calculated, every photograph intentional. Restaurant openings and gallery events, and a particularly well-photographed afternoon in Bukchon Hanok village that became their most shared photo. Min-jun's hand at her back, both of them laughing at something just out of frame, looking like two people who had stumbled into something they hadn't expected and decided to stay. The whispers followed them everywhere. She was thrown out with nothing, and now look at her. Those diamonds are real, and so is whatever's between them. I heard Kang Min-jun canceled a business trip to take her somewhere she wanted to go. I heard he's different with her. The Lee family was silent publicly, and apparently furious privately. Tae-young's mother's lawyer sent a letter. Min-jun's lawyer sent one back, twice as long and considerably more threatening. Tae-young himself sent a message that Zoe read once, standing in the kitchen at midnight, and then deleted. It said, "I'm sorry. I know that's too small, but I am." She didn't respond. She wasn't ready to assign him the luxury of her forgiveness. Maybe she never would be. That was allowed. Late one night, 3 weeks after the gala, Zoe found herself in Min-jun's kitchen at 1 a.m. making tea because she couldn't sleep. She heard his door, heard footsteps, and then he appeared in the kitchen doorway in a gray shirt and bare feet, looking rumpled and human in a way that the public version of Kang Min-jun absolutely never was. "Couldn't sleep," she said. Not a question. "Rarely do." He moved past her, opened the fridge, considered its contents with the expression of a man who had not personally grocery shopped in years. "What are you thinking about?" She wrapped both hands around her mug. "What happens when the scandal dies down? When we're no longer useful to each other? When the arrangement expires?" He closed the fridge, turned to look at her across the kitchen. "What if I told you I stopped thinking about the arrangement approximately 11 days ago? Min-jun, I'm serious." He moved to stand on the other side of the kitchen island. "What if I told you I don't want this to be temporary? That somewhere between the rainy bench and the gala balcony and the book you lent me." He stopped, jaw working. "This isn't something I know how to say easily." "Then say it badly," she said. "I'll understand." He looked at her with an intensity that felt like being seen down to the molecular level. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because of the Lee family, not because of the visa, not because it helps either of us. Just because the penthouse makes sense with you in it and doesn't without you. And that is the most terrifying thing I have said out loud in my adult life." Zoe set down her mug. "Kang Min-jun?" "Yes, I'm still afraid," she said honestly. "Of doing this again. Of losing myself in someone again. Of being someone's asset instead of someone's partner." "I know." He came around the island, stopped in front of her. "I'm not asking you not to be afraid. I'm asking you to let me be the kind of man who earns your trust slowly, on purpose, every day. That's what I want to do." A pause. "If you'll let me." She looked up at him, read his face, which was not easy because Minjun's face was a well-defended fortress, and found what she was looking for. Not performance, not strategy, just a man standing in bare feet in a kitchen at 1 a.m., telling the truth because she'd asked him to. Okay, she said quietly. Okay? Don't make me repeat it. He almost smiled. Then he did smile. Fully. Finally, the kind of smile that rearranged everything it landed on. He reached out and tucked her hair back. That same quiet gesture from the elevator. And she thought about how much a person could say with a gesture if they meant it. 2 weeks later, everything detonated. Zoe woke to her phone already overflowing. She found Min-jun in the living room, standing with his arms crossed, watching a news broadcast with an expression carved from stone. Tae-yang's mother was on screen, seated in the Gangnam mansion, flanked by lawyers, describing Zoe calmly, precisely, with the devastating credibility of a woman's soul had trusted for decades. As a woman who had manipulated her way into a second marriage, who had fabricated fertility struggles for sympathy, who had stolen from the Lee family before leaving. Lies. All of it. Precise, weaponized lies, delivered with perfect composure. They're trying to bury me, Zoe said flatly. They're trying to, Min-jun said. They won't. Min-jun, they're one of the most respected families in Seoul. People will, by tonight, he said, turning to look at her directly. No one will be talking about your fertility or your morals. They'll be talking about Lee Tae-yang's gambling debt, which has cost the family over 2 billion won in the last 3 years. They'll be talking about embezzlement from the family company, for which I have documentation going back 4 years. They'll be talking about several other things I've been saving for exactly this moment. She stared at him. You've been building this case since the moment I decided to marry you. He took her hands. His grip was warm and certain. I told you, what's mine, I protect. Your name is mine now. Your dignity is mine. Your history, your future. I don't let people destroy what's mine. I'm not a possession. No. He squeezed her hands. You're my partner. And no one attacks my partner while I can do anything about it. The war lasted 4 days, and it was total. Min-jun's team released everything, precisely timed and meticulously documented. Financial records, hotel receipts, testimony from former company employees about the embezzlement, evidence of the gambling debts. By the end of the first day, the narrative had shifted entirely. The Lee family's lawyers were issuing statements. Tae-yang's father had stepped back from public functions. His mother had stopped appearing in the media, and the family that had stood in Zoe's way like a mountain for 5 years was revealed, suddenly and comprehensively, as rubble that had only appeared solid. Zoe watched it unfold from the penthouse with a complicated tightness in her chest. She'd wanted this. She dreamed of this. And watching it happen felt not triumphant, not satisfying. It felt like cutting something out of yourself that had grown in, where the relief and the grief were inseparable. Min-jun found her at the windows. It's done, he said. I know. She leaned her forehead against the glass. I thought it would feel like winning. And? It just feels like it's over. She turned to look at him. Is that terrible? That I feel sad instead of happy? No. He moved beside her. It means you were actually in love with him once. That you actually tried. That you're a person with a heart, not just a person with a grudge. His shoulder pressed gently against hers. That's not terrible. That's everything. She rested her head on his shoulder. He stiffened for just a fraction of a second. The instinctive tension of a man who hadn't been leaned on in a long time, and then settled, deliberately, his cheek coming to rest against the top of her head. They stayed like that while Seoul moved below them, the city unbothered and eternal, carrying on with its 10 million lives. 6 weeks. After the gala, Zoe sat in a doctor's office in Apgujeong and received information that rearranged her entire understanding of the last 5 years. Congratulations, Mrs. Kang. She heard the words from what felt like the bottom of a very deep pool. You're approximately 7 weeks pregnant. The room was perfectly still. She stopped. Tried again. I was told I couldn't. I spent 5 years in treatment, specialist after specialist. They said, infertility has many causes, the doctor said gently. Stress is among the most significant and the most under-discussed. When the body feels chronically unsafe, it does not prioritize reproduction. When that stress is removed, she spread her hands, the body remembers what it knows how to do. Zoe drove back to the penthouse on autopilot, her hands on the wheel, Seoul moving past the windows like a dream. 7 weeks. 7 weeks ago, she had been sitting on a bench in the rain with 30 days left on her visa and no direction that wasn't a wall. 7 weeks ago, she had got into a stranger's car. She found Min Jun in his study, reviewing something on his laptop, reading glasses she'd never seen him wear in public perched on the end of his nose. He looked up, read her face in approximately half a second. Sit down, he said. I'm pregnant. He went very still. The laptop forgotten. The glasses forgotten. Just him and those dark eyes and the absolute electric silence of a man whose entire body had just performed an emergency recalibration. I'm sorry, she said, her voice fraying. This was never part of, I didn't plan. He was out of his chair before she could finish the sentence. He crossed the room and she didn't know what she expected. Composure, calculation, a carefully managed response. He put both hands on her face and looked at her with an expression so raw and undefended that she forgot how to speak. Don't apologize, he said. His voice was rough. Don't you dare apologize for this. Min Jun? Your body knew, he said. It knew it was finally safe, finally somewhere real. He pressed his forehead to hers. I want this. I want this more than I know how to say, and you know I'm not good at saying things, so you know what it means that I'm trying. She laughed through the tears she'd been trying to hold. He held her face like she was something he was afraid to break and determined not to. We're doing this, he said. We're doing this, she agreed. The months that followed were loud and warm and messily, irreversibly real. The pregnancy news reached the public at 4 months. Via a photograph Min Jun's PR team had actually, for once, not strategically planned. A paparazzi shot of Min Jun with his hand at Zoe's still small stomach outside a restaurant in Mapo. Her laughing at something, him looking at her with an expression that every tabloid in Seoul immediately described, with various levels of poetic license, as the most unguarded anyone had ever seen Kang Min Jun look in public. The headlines were relentless. Seoul's most dangerous man, undone. Zoe had laughed so hard she cried. Min Jun had frowned at the headline and then, privately, asked her to save it. He became protective in a way that was simultaneously deeply touching and occasionally maddening. He could not be in the penthouse without checking where she was. He learned to cook 3 specific things she wanted at 11 p.m. and failed cheerfully at all of them until he succeeded. He read the same parenting book in both Korean and English and told her, with complete seriousness, that the 2 editions contradicted each other at several key points and that someone needed to be held accountable. You're not running a boardroom? She told him one evening. I am, however, managing a very significant new acquisition, he said, looking at her stomach. She threw a cushion at him. He caught it and smiled. At 5 months, a message came that Zoe read once and then put her phone down and sat quietly in the kitchen for a long time. Min Jun found her there and didn't ask, just sat beside her and waited. Tae-young sent something, she said finally. Do you want me to leave? No. She picked the phone back up, read it aloud. Tae-young's message was short. He said he had seen the pregnancy news. He said he understood now that the problem had never been her. He said he was sorry. Not grandly, not with excuses or explanations. Just sorry. And that she deserved everything she had found, and more. It was not an apology that fixed anything, but it was an honest one. That was worth something. Does it change anything? Minjun asked. Zoe thought about it honestly. It closes a door, she said. Not a door I was trying to reopen, but a door that had been stuck half open and letting cold air in. She set down the phone. It's closed now. Minjun nodded. His hand found hers on the table. Good, he said simply. They sat in the quiet kitchen, and the baby kicked, which it had recently started doing at the most editorially appropriate moments, and Zoe laughed and pressed Minjun's hand to her stomach and watched him go absolutely silent and still with wonder. At 8 months, the baby decided not to wait. Zoe was alone in the penthouse on a Wednesday afternoon when the pain started, sharp and insistent and entirely impossible to misinterpret. She called Minjun. He answered on the first ring. Something's wrong, she said. The baby's coming. Minjun, it's too early. I'm 12 minutes away, he said. His voice was the calmest she'd ever heard it, which she understood immediately as the particular calm of someone who is managing terror by converting it entirely into action. Call the hospital. I'll be there. It's a month early. It's not supposed to. Zoe. Her name, the way he said it, cut through everything. Listen to me. You are the strongest person I know. You have survived things that would have finished most people. You can do this. I am coming. I will be there. Okay, she breathed. Okay. He was there in 10 minutes. 3 hours of labor. 3 hours during which Minjun held her hand without releasing it once, spoke quietly and steadily through the worst of it, and looked, for the first time since she'd known him, completely unguarded in front of other people. Like the armor had simply become irrelevant. Like there were things that mattered more than composure. Then a sound, small and furious and perfect. It's a girl, the doctor said. Small but strong. Mrs. Kang, meet your daughter. They placed her on Zoe's chest. Minjun made a sound she'd never heard from him before, something broken open and remade all at once. She looked up and found him crying without any apparent awareness that he was crying, looking at the tiny face with the expression of a man encountering something the universe had failed to warn him was possible. She's perfect, he said. His voice was completely wrecked. She is absolutely... Zoe, she's perfect. She looks like you, Zoe said. She looks like you. She has your frown. He laughed. It was fractured and warm and entirely unlike the carefully managed sounds he usually allowed himself. She does not have my frown. She absolutely has your frown. They named her Seoul because it meant gentle and graceful, and because they had both traveled through considerable ungentleness to arrive at this moment, and naming her for the thing they were trying to build felt right. The first weeks were the kind of exhausting that rewired you. Seo-yeon was small and loud and had opinions about everything. Minjun, who ran companies and negotiated with dangerous people and had never once in their acquaintance looked uncertain, was frequently uncertain. He held her with the focused intensity of a man who had decided to learn this skill and was taking it as seriously as any other. Zoe would find them at 3 a.m. Him, pacing the nursery with Seo-yeon against his shoulder, talking to her in low Korean, about the city, about the food she'd be able to try when she was older, about things he'd done wrong and was working on, about her mother. Your mother walked into my life, he told her one night, not knowing Zoe was listening from the doorway, when I was very close to becoming someone entirely not worth being. She didn't fix me. She doesn't owe me that, and don't let anyone ever tell you that love is about fixing people. But she showed me what it looked like to be genuinely strong, and I looked at her and thought, I want to be the kind of man she could respect. And then I wanted to be more than that. A pause. And then it turned out that wanting those things, and actually trying, is how you become them. Zoe stood in the doorway, with her hand over her mouth, and let herself cry, quietly, alone, before going to join them. A year later, Seo-yeon had a party, Just family. Zoe's mother had flown in from Lagos, warm and loud and immediately charmed by Min-jun in a way that would have been funny if it hadn't also been everything. Min-jun's grandmother came from Busan, a few close friends. The penthouse was small, with noise and laughter and the smell of food and the sound of Seo-yeon, who had developed strong opinions about cake. Zoe stood at the kitchen counter watching her daughter discover what frosting was and looked across the room at Min-jun, who was deep in conversation with her mother and losing the conversation in a way that was clearly delighting him. He looked up at the same moment she looked over, held her eyes across the room for a moment, long enough to say everything that needed saying, through the noise and the laughter and their daughter's increasingly emphatic cake-related demands. He excused himself and crossed to her. "Your mother wants us to visit Nigeria," he said. "I know. I told her we'd go in the spring." She blinked. She didn't ask me the way people usually ask me things, he said, looking slightly bewildered in a way she loved. "She just said, 'You're coming in March,' and I agreed before I understood that I was agreeing." Zoe laughed. "Welcome to my mother. She's extraordinary," he said, with a genuine respect. "Now I understand where you got it." 5 years after the rainy bench in Itaewon, Zoe and Min-jun stood on the balcony of the penthouse at night. The same balcony, the same city below. Seo-yeon was asleep inside, having negotiated an extra 20 minutes of wakefulness before conceding. The air was cool and the Seoul skyline blazed. "Do you ever regret it?" Zoe asked. "Marrying you?" He didn't hesitate. "Never. It started as a lie. The best thing I ever built started as a bad idea," he said. "Doesn't mean what it became isn't real." He turned her to face him. "You saved me, Zoe. Not in a way that requires you to be responsible for me. That's not what I mean. I mean you showed up in the worst moment of your life and chose to keep going forward instead of disappearing. And watching you do that reminded me that I had forgotten how to choose. That I was just moving, not choosing." His thumb traced her jaw. "You gave me back the difference." She looked at him. This dangerous, complicated, deeply surprising man who had picked her up off a bench in the rain and somewhere along the way become the truest thing in her life. "I love you," she said. "I love you more." His voice was certain. Immeasurably more. Impossible. Completely true. She kissed him there on the balcony with Seoul spread below them like proof that broken things could be rebuilt into something better than they were before. His arms came around her, warm and steady and permanent. Inside, Seo-yeon stirred and resettled and was quiet. They had started with divorce papers and a rainy bench and a revenge arrangement and 2 people who had each, in different ways, learned to expect the worst from people. And they had become something else entirely. A family. A home. 2 people who had been planted in the dark, separately, and grown toward the same light without knowing it. Until one October night, when a black Mercedes pulled up in Itaewon, and a man said her name in a voice like smoke and questions and possibility, and a woman too tired to be afraid got in. Zoe had not been broken. She had been buried. And from that ground, in that city, with that impossible, infuriating, magnificent man, she had grown into everything she had ever been, but never been allowed to be. She was enough. She had always been enough. She just needed someone with the eyes to see it. And Kang Min-jun, the man Seoul called dangerous, the man who'd built an empire from nothing, the man who cried at 3 a.m. over a baby he couldn't stop holding. He saw her, all of her, every broken and healed and fierce and frightened part. He saw her, and that was everything. If this story made you feel something, besties. A like, a share, and a subscribe costs nothing but means everything. New stories drop every week, and I promise you, they only get more addictive from here. Welcome K-Mafia romance stories. You're home.